Hi, everyone. Welcome back to this session. And today I am joined by Matty Dalrymple. Matty, welcome back.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here.
Absolutely great to have you. Now, I'm sure most of you know Matty, but for those of you who don't, she is a writer, a very great author with the Lizzie Ballard series, but also a writing coach and the host of the Indie Author podcast, which I think now, what number episode have you reached now?
200. I just hit 200 a couple of episodes ago.
Great. So yeah, definitely recommend that, and we'll have links to everything below the video or in other places, but near the video, anyways. Today, Matty is joining us for a presentation on a very important topic, I think, which is the topic that some people find a little bit uncomfortable, which is pitching yourself to other bloggers, podcasters, and just sort of, I think, getting over the fear of putting yourself out there and pitching yourself for promoting your work, essentially. So, if Matty is ready, I would give the mic to her. In the meantime, I'll mute myself, but I'll be taking notes because I have my analog Apple pencil here, which is a pen, and I'll catch you back for some questions at the end, and I'll see you there. Thanks, Matty.
Great. And if you can just confirm that you're seeing my
We
PowerPoint
can.
presentation now.
Perfect.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you again for the invitation. And as Brian mentioned, I'm going to be talking about pitching for promotion, getting the gig with podcasters, bloggers, and reviewers. And just to give a little recap of who I am, I'm the author of the Anne Kinnear suspense novels and suspense shorts and the Lizzie Ballard thrillers. And I also write, speak, consult, and podcast about the writing craft and the publishing voyage as the indie author. And you can find more about me at mattydalrymple.com and at theindyauthor.com. So I think the whole concept of pitching is very familiar to most writers. And I think when people first think about the concept of pitching, they're thinking primarily of two audiences, agents and editors. And certainly if you're pursuing traditional publishing, these need to be very high on your list of people you need to pitch and pitches you need to hone. But regardless of what editing path or what publishing path you take, there is a third group that you need to consider, and those are promoters. And whether you're indie published or traditionally published, you're going to have to pitch to promoters in order to get your work out into the world and find readers for it. And so in this presentation, I'm going to be focusing on a specific group of promoters, and those are ones who accept personal pitches. So I'm not talking about services like publicists or blog tour organizers. These are people that you have the opportunity to pitch yourself to directly. Those who are promoting you and your work at no charge. So this is excluding things like Kirkus, which provides reviews for a fee, not necessarily good reviews, but reviews. So these are only promoters who promote your work for no charge, and then who offer promotions through podcasts, blogs, and reviews. So I'll be tapping into my own experience both as the host of the Indie Author podcast, but also a frequent podcast guest, and then other experiences I've had in the blog and the reviews areas. So let's talk about the benefits of pitching podcasts, blogs, and reviews. And I have this little Venn diagram, and I'm kind of calling out here what I think the common benefits are for each of these. So starting with podcasts, certainly anything in audio is growing in popularity. You can capitalize on that popularity by pitching yourself to podcasts, using podcast audiences as a target for your promotions. I would say that a common benefit between podcasts and reviews is time efficiency and audience targeting. And so when you're doing a podcast, you are more or less just investing the time it takes to give the interview, although I'm going to have some exceptions to that rule a little bit. If you're requesting reviews, you're pretty much investing your time to find the right reviewers and get your book to them, but there's not a lot of effort beyond that. Audience targeting, in both of those areas, you can find promoters and audiences that are very specific to your genre. So For example, the Indie Author podcast is very specifically targeted at writers. I've requested reviews from reviewers who focus specifically on mystery or thrillers. And so you can have a really nice targeted outreach between those platforms. Reviews is certainly a reflection, you hope, of craft skill. And so if you ask for a review and you get one and you get a good one, then you're not only getting your work out there in front of new audiences, but you are conveying to them that it's a good product. I would say that the benefit that both reviews and blogs share is that they're easily shareable. Those come up online. You can easily put links to them in your social media or include them in your email newsletter. So very easy to share them with your audience, with your current fans, for example. And then I would say that the common benefit between blogs and podcasts is that in general, you control the content. So unlike reviews, where you're kind of at the mercy of the reviewer, if you're giving a podcast interview or you're providing a blog to another platform to publish, then you're providing the content, and that can be a nice benefit. And also, blogs and podcasts are a nice promotion of the reviewer as well as the book. I mean, if you get a review, um, then you're obviously promoting the book. But if you are able to place yourself on a podcast or a blog, then you as an author are getting promotion as well. So one of the first questions you want to ask yourself is DIY or hire a pro? And so here I've outlined some of the key considerations for each of those approaches. So if you're doing it yourself, in other words, if you are looking for opportunities to pitch yourself rather than hiring a pro, then you're investing time rather than money. So this is completely dependent on your own circumstances. The advantage of hiring a pro is you're investing money rather than time, and so consider the different circumstances where each of these may play out. If you're holding down a full-time job and your author career is still something you do on the evenings and weekends, it might behoove you to invest money rather than time. If you're doing this full time, it might behoove you to invest the time rather than the money. So just a consideration in DIY versus hiring a pro. If you're doing it yourself, you need to be willing to wear a different hat. And Brian referred to this at the beginning, that this idea of pitching ourselves can sometimes be sort of uncomfortable. And so you have to take off your writer hat and you have to take off your self hat, I would say, and be willing to say, I'm willing to pitch myself as if I were my own publicist. And that's something that's more or less comfortable for some people. You need to be willing to do that if you're doing it yourself. If you're hiring a pro, they do it for you, and you're also benefiting from the pro's connections. And so if it's a reputable service offering, then they've built up a platform around pitching authors to these different promoters. A difference between doing it yourself and hiring a pro is DIY is better if you're looking for the benefit over time. And so I have sort of a cycling list of platforms that I'm pitching myself to. That's oftentimes podcasts or conferences, and I can do that at any time. For example, when my book Taking the Short Tack came out, I spent some time right after the launch pitching myself to different platforms in order to talk about using short fiction for business, but I can still do that. So it's not something that you can only benefit from around the launch of a book. Whereas hiring a pro, I think, is really best for a blitz in support of a launch. Oftentimes you'll see professional publicists, professional PR groups who offer these kinds of services where they say, in the month that your book comes out, or in the days or weeks that around when your book comes out, we're going to get you on as many podcasts or reviewed by as many platforms or placed on as many blogs as possible. So it's just a different chronological approach there. And the final difference I wanted to talk about is DIY means that you need to plan what you're going for. Again, you need to put on your publicist hat and you need to understand what your goals are for your pitching. With a pro, you need to understand what you're getting. And so this is really a matter of reading the fine print on a contract that you're signing or on the offerings that they're giving you in order to understand what you're getting there. So you can see here, I'm recommending a preference of one of these over the other. The do-it-yourself, I think that there are real benefits to pitching yourself rather than hiring a pro, because no one represents yourself as well as you do. And I really see this play out when I am accepting pitches for the Indie Author podcast. If someone contacts me directly, just in that contact, I have some sense of whether there's somebody I want to work with, depending on their demeanor or how professionally they're presenting themselves. And it really is a plus in the column of having them on as a guest. I also get a lot of pitches from PR firms, and it's almost a hurdle for a guest to get past my initial reaction of like, oh, this is coming secondhand. Am I really going to get a good sense of this potential guest from there? So I think you representing yourself best is a benefit not to be overlooked. Um, if you hire a pro, you're relying on their representation of you as an attractive guest or an attractive blogger or an attractive review subject. And the other benefit of DIY is you gain personal connections as well as promotion. And those personal connections can last a long time. I'm going to be talking about that a little bit later. If you hire a pro and you have that intermediary, you just lessen the personal communication. And I think you lessen the chance that you're going to be able to use that um, to take advantage of that relationship and on an ongoing basis and return the favor on an ongoing basis. What you want to do is set up a two-way relationship there. So these are the topics that we're going to be covering, and I am going to be focusing on the DIY approach. We'll be talking about finding opportunities for pitching yourself, assessing the candidates that you want to pitch yourself to, understanding your audience, doing your prep and laying the groundwork, seizing the opportunities when they arise, making it personal and making it easy for the person you're pitching to, being professional and delivering on your commitment, the importance of promoting and repurposing, and the opportunity for deepening your connection. So I have listed here some opportunities, some platforms you can use in order to find opportunities for pitching yourself to podcasts, blogs, and reviews. Under podcasts here, I have listed some of the platforms that you can use in order to find a matchmaker. I mean, these are really matchmakers between guests and potential hosts. So Matchmaker FM, podcastguests.com, podmatch.com, interviewconnections.com, listennotes.com. All of these are platforms where you can go in and you can say, I'm an author, I have expertise in particular areas, the business uses of short fiction or podcasting for authors or whatever that might be. Or maybe my area of expertise is suspense and thriller fiction. And then you can have a profile out there that's searchable by people who are looking for guests with particular expertise. And I've used a couple of these. I've never paid for any of these services, but I've used a couple of these in the free format. And if you get the free service, it really is more DIY. So you're having to do more of the legwork. I imagine that the more you pay, then the more support you get from the platform in terms of actively helping you to make those connections. And I think all of these are worth checking out just to see what they're about. But you can see there at the bottom, I've called out my own preference, which is the best way to pitch yourself is to build a community and establish a connection. And throughout the conversation, I'm going to be talking about some of the ways that you want to do that. But definitely check these out. I don't know that I dive into a paid version right away, but you can glean some useful information even from the free options there. And then if you're looking for opportunities to pitch yourself to blogs and reviews, then I would say that probably the best place to do that is via writers groups and especially genre groups. So the more specific a genre group you belong to, the more beneficial that can be. The more you niche down, the more likely you are going to be to appeal to someone who is looking for a guest or someone to promote in that particular niche. So, for example, I'm a member of Sisters in Crime, and I would definitely tap into that group to find blogs or reviews that are interested in crime fiction, mystery, thriller, suspense novels, and so on. And then certainly social media is a great opportunity. Go on to whatever your favorite social media platform is, do a search for your area of expertise, your topic area, and blogs or reviews. Do that in Google as well, of course, and look for opportunities that way. So once you have collected a list of places where you might want to pitch yourself, then you want to assess the candidates. And one of the things you want to assess is their niche aligned with your topic. And as you've probably heard many times before, this is a good analogy to pitching to editors and agents. Comply with what the promoter is advertising as the area they're interested in. So just as the advice would be, if you are writing YA thrillers. Don't send your work to an agent or an editor who is advertising that they're looking for nonfiction how-to books. In the same way, you want to make sure that the topic that you're offering is nicely aligned with the promoters that you're pitching yourself to. And again, the more you can niche down, in a lot of cases, the more successful each of your pitches will be. You may be pitching to a smaller pool, but your pitches may be more successful because there's that very tight alignment. Um, Another consideration is how wide is their social media reach? So, you're looking for this for promotion. And so that's not to say you shouldn't go with someone who's just starting out with their podcast or just starting out with their reviews. But if you find someone who already has a large audience and that audience meets the audience that you want to reach, that's certainly a factor to include in your assessment. How actively do they promote their guests? So, this is something that I've been surprised over time that sometimes even platforms that have a relatively small number of followers, you can get a lot of promotional bang for your buck out of because they are very actively engaged in promoting their platform to their audience. And then there are others that have a very large um, audience theoretically, but they're not doing much promotion of their platform, whether that be a podcast or a review or a blog. And so you're not getting as much benefit. So I always recommend that you follow the people that you want to pitch on social media or on their email newsletters or their websites or whatever platform they're using to get their content out, to see if the time you invest in pitching yourself to them is going to pay you back in an actively promoted promotion. Are their brand and values aligned with yours? So you don't want to reach a large audience, but suddenly find that you've allied yourself with a camp that you really can't agree with, or that you're alienating people in that audience because your brand or your values are not aligned with those. So, an obvious example would be, a political position, or, promoters who have a reputation of more extreme positions, or at the same time, if you yourself are promoting something that represents an extreme political position, then maybe you want to seek those people out, but because they are aligned with your brand values, but just factor that in. Are there red flags? And anytime I have an opportunity to talk with writers, I always like to make sure that they're aware of the site Writer Beware. And if you just Google Writer Beware, you'll find this site. It's a blog post run by Victoria Strauss, and they research bad players in the author products and services space. And so that's the first place you want to go. You want to make sure that they haven't had any bad write-ups on Writer Beware. Another source would be the Alliance of Independent Authors Ratings and Reviews service. And I believe that is at selfpublishingadvice.org/ratings. And you can go on there and see they've green lighted, red lighted, and yellow lighted various services. So steer away from the red lighted ones. And then a really important one, and I'm going to keep coming back to this theme of pitching within the area that you have personal focus in, is what podcasts or blogs do your current fans follow? And a great way to find this out is to go on social media and ask this question, or ask this question of the people on your email newsletter. I found some great podcasts that I wasn't aware of because I've heard about them from people who follow my own podcast, or I've chatted about them and they've come up in conversations with other authors that those authors appreciate. So tap into your current fans and followers and find out where they're hanging out, because if they like your stuff, then other people who are following that promoter will probably like your stuff as well. And why narrow the list? Because these promotions are free, but your time has value too. And so you don't want to spend all your time promoting, having a list of hundreds of possible opportunities, because your time is best spent in other ways as well, like writing, for example. A really important aspect of pitching yourself is understanding the audiences and interests. And I'm sure that we've all heard this phrase, what's in it for them. And I would recommend that there are three groups that you want to consider what's in it for them for. One is your target audience. So if you're looking to expand the expand your exposure to people who are really interested in travel literature, then your target audience is going to be that group. And you can think about, what do they appreciate? They might appreciate travel tips. They might appreciate stories of exotic locations. And so make sure that what you're offering is serving the needs of your target audience. Um, the promoter's audience, hopefully you want a lot of overlap between your target audience and your promoter's audience. And so you need to find the promoters whose audience is interested in, or potentially interested in, the topic you have to share with them. And then the third stakeholder here that I think is sometimes underrated is the promoter as an audience. And so the thought there is that you definitely want to include in your pitch information on why what you have to share is going to be of interest to your promoter's audience, but also understand what's in it for the promoter, him or herself. So make it clear that you have an audience of your own that you can promote to. Indicate that you're willing to share their information on social media. Make sure you understand that there's a what's in it for them for the promoter as well. So the next thing you want to do is do your prep and lay the groundwork. And there are a couple of key tips here I have, which is have experience with the medium you're pitching. So if you are thinking about pitching yourself to sites where you're they're going to share your blog content, you're going to write a blog and it's going to be posted on this other promoter's site, then you should really have experience at least reading blog posts. Like if you hate reading blog posts, then you probably don't want to offer yourself up as an author of blog posts. If you're pitching yourself to a reviewer, then you should have experience in reading reviews that are similar to the book that you want to promote. Certainly with podcasts, I think it is very difficult to be a successful podcast guest if you are not a podcast listener yourself, because there are just certain conventions about podcasting that it's super helpful to understand when you go into that experience. Second of all, have experience with the promoter you're pitching. So if you're asking the promoter to invest hours of producing your episode or preparing your blog post or reading your book for a review, then you really need to be willing to spend the time it takes in order to become familiar with their particular work. So if someone is pitching me for the Indie Author Podcast, I hope that they've at least spent time looking through the list of episodes, familiarizing themselves with the promise I make to my listeners about what the topics are going to be. And you're going to give a much more successful pitch if you do that. And then the third tip I would have to lay the groundwork for your pitch is to support and share the promoter's content before you pitch. And I pulled this from a conversation I had on the Indie Author Podcast with Christopher Zgorski, who is the reviewer behind Bolo Books. And he and I were exchanging tips for how to pitch successfully. I'll include a reference to that episode at the end of this presentation. And he said that, promoters are people too. And if he gets a pitch for a book to be read, then if he recognizes the name as someone who has been following him and supporting him on social media, that's just a check in that person's column. And so don't have the first time the promoter encounters you be the moment that your pitch lands in their inbox. Interact with them before you send that pitch so you have some familiarity with them and they have some familiarity with you. Another useful thing is to have a couple of topics you can pitch. So I've pulled out some examples for myself for fiction and nonfiction. So as an example, if I'm pitching myself to a promoter of fiction, then there are a couple of approaches I can take, or a couple of topics I can address. For example, what happens when an extraordinary ability transforms an ordinary life? That's kind of the tagline of my 2 series. How do you create the ticking clock of suspense? A sense of place when setting becomes character. So I could approach, let's say, a sponsor of a blog site and say, I would love to talk about my latest book in one of my series, and I'd be happy to talk about it from the point of view of any of these 3 topics. And it just gives the promoter a nice selection, because if they've just had somebody talking about setting as character, then they can say, oh, well, maybe not number 3, but one of the other ones would work well. Similarly, I have listed here some nonfiction examples: podcasting for authors, indie publishing, or short fiction. These are all topics that I use to pitch myself. So if I'm going to a podcast, I could say, I think that creating a story frame would be great for your audience, but here's some other options as well. Just gives the promoter some flexibility. And as always, make sure that all the topics are relatable and useful to your promoter's audience and your promoter, him or herself. I included this slide on seize the opportunity because there are, of course, all these times when you're pitching yourself as a planned activity, but you never know when you're going to be presented with an opportunity, let's say at a writers group meeting or at a conference, to pitch yourself for promotion. So be prepared for these possible encounters. If you're going to a conference, check the conference speaker and attendee list in advance. You might be going through there and say, oh, I see that this person who has a blog that I really like is going to be at the conference. So you can think about seizing that opportunity if you encounter them at the conference. Social media is, as I mentioned, an icebreaker. And so if you're going to that conference or you're going to that writers group meeting, find out who's there and then follow them on social media. That can give you some great fodder for approaching them at the cocktail party and say, oh, I loved your blog post about such and such, or I really appreciated your review about such and such. It just makes it a nice, comfortable entree to the person that you want to pitch. Look for the right time. So this is a tip that I pulled from some advice that I give about people attending writers' conferences, and that is you probably don't want to try to speak to someone right after their talk. So I've just been at a couple of writers' conferences, and inevitably there are fascinating keynote speakers, and as soon as their talk is done, they're mobbed by other attendees. So don't pick that time to pitch yourself for their platform. You're going to run into them throughout the conference, and there's going to be a time when they're, standing by the wall, just hoping that someone will talk to them, and that's the time to talk to them, not when you're one of a dozen people who's clamoring for their attention. Have your business card ready to offer. This seems self-evident, but I've been at a surprising number of conferences where I've asked someone for a business card and they haven't had one. Business cards might seem old-fashioned in the age of everything online, but there's really nothing better than to just be able to hand somebody a business card as a way to get in touch with you. And I'll also add this little extra tip that I finally gave in to some advice I got from the lovely Michael Laron and put my picture on my business card, because I've had plenty of experiences where I've gotten back from a conference. I'm looking through the stack of business cards I've collected, and I really have no memory of who that person was. But if you have your picture on your business card, it's just another personal connection that you're making with that promoter that you're pitching yourself to. And then have your elevator pitch ready. Just as you would have an elevator pitch ready to share with someone about your work, have your elevator pitch ready to share with someone who wants to hear about you yourself and how they can promote you. But with the caveat here, no hard sells. You don't want to be that person who's doing the equivalent of walking into the cocktail party and then forcing their business card on everyone. Make the seizing the opportunity a natural and conversational experience, not a hard sell. Another tip I would have is make it personal. We've already talked about the importance of keeping in mind the promoter's goals. If you are pitching not in person but via email, address the pitch to an individual. No, dear sir or madam. There's nothing more irritating than getting a form letter. Reflect your familiarity with their work. So if someone is, a lot of this is just countering the idea that you write up one pitch letter and then you fire it off to this long, long list of podcasts or reviewers or bloggers that you found. The generic pitches never get an invitation. For me, maybe they do with some other platforms, but reading a pitch where someone is reflecting a familiarity with my work really goes a long way to making me look positively on a particular pitch. And I'm going to be giving some examples of what that might look like in a moment. And then the other piece of advice I have is to link to your own online home base. So don't send a pitch to someone and then expect the promoter to do the legwork for you. Make sure that you're giving them access to your home base, that's probably your website, so they can get started quickly and easily on researching whether you're the kind of person they want to promote. And making it easy. So I recommend keeping it short and to the point. because we all have a limited amount of time, and if people are not going to wade through paragraphs and paragraphs of why you're a good guest or blogger or a book to review. Provide all the information in the format and the timeframes requested. In other words, don't make the promoter have to find it for themselves. So sometimes I'll get pitches for the podcast where someone sounds very interesting, but they've provided no links. And so they might have a name that's sort of common. And if I'm interested, I might start trying to look them up. But if I spend more than a minute or two trying to find them and thinking, oh, I wonder if this is the same John Doe that I just got a pitch from, you're going to lose that promoter. So make it easy for them to find the information. Make it easy for them to contact you. So regularly check your spam folder. Here's another, if you leave with no other tip from this session than this. There are so many times when I have tried to get in touch with someone and time goes by, and then maybe months later I get an email from them and they say, oh, I just found your email in my spam folder. But at that point, that ship has sailed. That opportunity is gone. So if you're reaching out to people, make sure you are checking your spam folder regularly to make sure that their response isn't lingering in there. I'll also just loop back in terms of the providing all the information in the format and timeframes requested. If a promoter asks you to provide a bio, just send them the bio right away. It's not going to take you more time to send the bio now than it will in a week, and the promoter will appreciate getting the information promptly. If there's a form that they're asking you to fill out, just fill out the form completely. You don't want to do anything that's going to make them have any hesitance about having an interaction with you. And don't ask them to buy your book. This is one that I got from Christopher Zgorski, that sometimes people would send Chris a request to review their book for Bolo Books, and then they would say, you can buy it on Amazon. Well, no, because almost by definition, all these people who are offering these promotional opportunities for free are doing it for free. It's a labor of love, and they're not getting paid, and you should not ask them to make a money investment in order to promote your work. So if they want your book, make sure you're prepared to send it to them in print or send it to them in EPUB or whatever their preference is. So here's a little template that you can use as a starting point for your own pitch. As a longtime reader or listener of the promotion platform, I especially enjoyed some recent content about something and give the reason that you enjoyed it. I'd like to propose myself as a guest to talk about one of two related topics. I believe your audience could benefit, and here's how. That's very important. Always be very explicit about how you believe the promoter's audience will benefit from what you have to offer. You can find examples of me addressing this topic at Provide Links, and you can find out more about me at my website, Provide a Link. I've also included the links to my social media accounts below. And a really great example of this that played out for me for the Indie Author Podcast is I had someone contact me and asked if he could be a guest on the podcast. And I said, well, can you send me some links to places where you've addressed this topic? You know, maybe that's an interview on another podcast or at a class or something like that. And he wrote back and he said, well, I haven't done that yet, but I've recorded a video of me talking on the topic. And it was a great approach. That person ended up being on the podcast because he was acknowledging, like, you don't have to lie about having experience. He was being very upfront about the fact that this would be his first visit to a podcast. But by recording a video specifically for me, it also first kind of made me special that he went to all this trouble, but it gave me all the information I was looking for. He was clearly very knowledgeable about his topic. He was very enthusiastic about talking about it. He had a good audio and video setup, so it was a pleasant experience. And so if you can find those kinds of, if you already have those kinds of credibility support out there, that's great. But if you don't have those already, then creating one specifically for the promoter or for the promotion you want to make is a great option. And so here's an example of how this might play out if someone were pitching the Indie Author Podcast. As a longtime listener of the Indie Author Podcast, I especially enjoyed the recent episode about tips for attending writers' conferences, since this is a topic many introverted creators struggle with. I'd like to propose myself as a guest to talk about one of two related topics: the shy person's guide to being your own publicist and building your creative community. I believe your audience could benefit from the specific tips I provide about how to spread the word about one's own work in a way that is beneficial and enjoyable for you and your audience. You can find examples of me addressing this topic with, and then there would be links to these examples, and you can find out more about me at my website and providing the social media links below. So obviously this can be tweaked as appropriate for your own needs, but just that idea that you're expressing familiarity with a promoter's platform, you're being explicit about the benefit you can bring to their audience, and you're making it easy for them to find out more about you is kind of the key three things you want to include in a pitch. So the other tip is be professional. In all of your interactions as an author, be professional. Be on your best behavior, and be upbeat. So you always want to approach every pitch as if, even if you don't get this one, you might get one down the road. There are many, many reasons why a promoter is going to say no to you, and you don't want to eliminate the possibility that they're going to consider you for a future promotion. So that means making sure that you're replying promptly with the information they're requesting, being upbeat. Like, desperation is never a good look. And so you want to approach all of these as if you're feeling comfortable in the value you're bringing, and you're looking at this as not a confrontational interaction, but a potentially mutually beneficial interaction. So being upbeat is super helpful. I would say one follow-up if no response, and you'll get really different pieces of advice about this from promoters. Some say that, sometimes they don't even notice until they've gotten three. But for me, one follow-up is okay. Occasionally I've gotten a pitch and I'm still thinking about it. And like a week later, I'll get a follow-up saying, just wanted to check in on this. And it is the thing that triggers me to finally make a decision one way or the other. But after that, I would say, don't keep hounding them. If you're not hearing from them, it either means that they're not interested or it's going into their spam folder and another email isn't going to help. Don't take it personally if you don't get a yes. So just as with editors and agents, there are lots and lots of reasons other than the quality of your writing that would lead an editor or agent to say no. There are similarly lots of reasons a promoter might say no. It might be that their schedule is booked up. It might be that their own time allocation to that platform, remember this is all labor of love, they're having to scale back. They may have a better sense of their audience than you do, and they realize that it's not a good match, even though you've done your homework and you think it is. I know it's easy to say don't take it personally, but really, it's rarely a personal thing. It's just a matter of circumstances if someone says no to your request for a pitch. You can improve your chances if you can be flexible. So, for example, I always try to make it clear to people who pitch me for the Indie Author Podcast that I can't always guarantee that the episode is going to go out near a book launch, for example. So be flexible with that. Lots of times this content is evergreen, so it doesn't really matter. And say thank you even if you didn't get the gig, because even if you didn't get this gig, you may get the next one, and you will improve your chances of that happening if you make the experience pleasant for the promoter that you're pitching to. Deliver on your commitment. This is kind of more on the be professional recommendation. So be on time, come prepared, and give the same if the audience is 1 or 1 million. So if you're writing a blog post, make sure you get your blog post to the promoter on time. If you're asking for a review, make sure that you get the book to the reviewer in the timeframes that they've requested. If you're going to be recording a podcast interview, be on Zoom 5 minutes before you're supposed to be, so that you're sure that you're there and ready to deliver on your commitment when the podcast guest shows up. Come prepared. Make sure that you've done the homework that has been requested of you. If it's a podcast host and they've asked you to, vet the space behind you because they're going to be sharing video, make sure you don't have laundry sitting behind you. Just make sure that you come prepared. And give the same if the audience is 1 or 1 million. I think is so important for anything we do as authors. If you have one person read your book or you have 1 million people read your book, you want the quality to be the same, and what you deliver for promotional opportunities should be the same. If you've agreed to do an interview with a podcaster who is just starting out, maybe doesn't have an audience at all, then the amount of time and effort you put into that should not be any different than if you're getting ready to go on, the big name podcast, or if your book is being reviewed by the big name reviewer. Um, it's, if nothing else, it's good practice to bring that professional mindset to an audience of one, but it's also just good karma to deliver the same performance, whether it's an audience of 1 or 1 million. So, promote and repurpose. This is something that I think is really surprisingly underutilized by the people who have gotten an opportunity to promote their work. Um, and this guideline about 1 or 1 million continues here as well. I know some people say, "Well, I didn't put it up on my Facebook page because I only have 12 followers." Well, those are 12 followers who are going to not only appreciate the content that you shared, but are going to be exposed to the promoter's work as well. And the promoter will appreciate that. The promoter is probably just more concerned with seeing that you've spent the time and effort to share what they've done with you than counting how many followers you're having. So, same with your email list. It doesn't matter if you only have 4 people on your email list. You still need to include these promotions and make the most of them by sharing them on those platforms. Um, Repurposing the content within the promoter's guidelines. I don't think I've ever encountered a promoter who has imposed any limits on this. And so, if someone were to want to take some video from the Indie Author Podcast episode and repurpose it, that would be fine with me. If reviewers are reviewing books, they're certainly going to be pleased to have you excerpt portions of their review and then credit it back to them. And so, it's not just the original piece of content that the promoter provides, but oftentimes there are opportunities for you to repurpose that in different formats and make the most of it, both for yourself and for the promoter. And then repost the content as long as it's relevant. I mean, for episodes of the podcast, there are episodes that I recorded years ago that I'm still sharing because the content is still valuable. And if you've spent the time and effort to line up a book review or a blog post placement or a podcast interview, then keep sharing that out. Just put it on your tickler file of things to do, and every month, every quarter, every whatever period of time makes sense for you, just share it out again and flag the promoter so that they know that you're doing that. And again, you're paving the way to a valuable long-term relationship. And you're paving the way to deepening the connection. And so by nurturing those relationships over the long term with the promoters that you have connected with, it pays dividends for both of you over time. Continue to engage with them on social media or whatever other platforms they're active on. Continue to share their content as is appropriate to your brand, and alert them to content of interest to them. And so there are reviewers that I know that I may read a book and say, "Oh, this would be perfect for so and so to review," and I'll send them a note and I'll say, "Oh, have you read this book? It's not mine; it's somebody else's. Have you read this book? I think it would really be up your alley." Or podcasters who I'll get in touch with and say, "Oh, I just interviewed this person. You might want to interview them too." And so, just continuing to build that community can do nothing but good for you and the people that you want to reach out to for help promoting your work. So I listed here some of the episodes of the Indie Author Podcast that I cribbed from in order to put together this presentation. I had already mentioned the conversation with Christopher Zagorski of Bolo Books about the do's and don'ts of working with book bloggers. There's a great conversation with Michelle Glogovac using podcasts to support your book launch. And that's really great because it will give you more of a perspective on the hiring a pro side of this. I mean, I've really focused on the DIY side, but Michelle talks in some detail about the hiring a pro side. I included this conversation with Jim Azevedo, tips for attending writers' conferences, because I think some of the tips that Jim shares about getting over that hump of promoting yourself. In this case, he was talking about it in the context of writers' conferences, but I think a lot of that is really transferable. And then finally, moving past self-doubt to promote your work with Shelby Lee, because again, it's not always easy to take off the writer hat and put on the promoter hat when we're doing the work to promote ourselves when we take the DIY approach to pitching for promotion. And so that is what I have to share about pitching for promotion, getting the gig with podcasters, bloggers, and reviewers. And Brian, if you have any questions, I would be happy to discuss them with you.
Yeah, that's been absolutely great. I was taking notes because even organizing a writers conference is not easy, especially when I did my first one. I had to reach out to everyone from zero, and it gets a bit easier. And I'm sure it's the same with podcasts and blogs. As soon as you've been doing this for a while, you can say, um, I was recommended by so and so, or I had this so and so on my podcast. So for me, it was very hard to just reach out of the blue and ask, would you come to my conference? But I think even tips like when you get a no for an answer is not it's not personal. I've gotten many of them, and the first times were all a bit, there you go, see, I shouldn't have done it. But it really isn't, the end of the world. And also, I clearly remember people who said no, maybe the second time, and then said yes the third time, or even in reverse. The first time they were guests, and the second time it just was on the right time for them, and so they said no. So it's all great.
Yeah. I I think that comment about, I mean, a lot of these are, I talked about podcasters, bloggers, and reviewers, but many of these are just applicable to any kind of pitch. And I think that perspective of pitching yourself to be a speaker at a conference is a great other example of where these things come into effect. And then I also think it's really interesting to hear your perspective that as an organizer, like I'm sure people saw you as the promoter, but sometimes the promoter is the pitcher. And so sometimes that can help you feel more comfortable because it's not an us versus them experience. You know, we're both pitching to each other and we're both looking for that mutually beneficial relationship to build.
Yeah, I think it's definitely not easy with conferences, online conferences. Because I'm familiar with those, especially when it comes down to topics and people you invite on a certain topic, because you essentially go for the topic first, and then you get connected with the person. I don't know if you see what I mean, but you really want somebody to talk about, for example, direct sales, and so you go look for somebody. And then there's the case where you want somebody on there because they are a very good personality, a very good name in the industry, and so you're a bit more open when it comes to the topic. But it's not easy, definitely. Especially as an introvert, I
Yeah.
mean, lots of us are all introverts, so it's not easy.
Well, I think that's a great example of the importance of having it be a professional and mutually beneficial relationship through
Yeah.
the whole experience, because there are definitely guests of the Indie Author podcast that they just have a standing open invitation. And I say, you know, whenever you have something you want to talk about, come on, let me know, because just as you're saying, they're super fun to talk to. They're very aligned with my brand. Their personality meshes well with what I think my listeners like to hear. And so, yeah, I think that's kind of the holy grail that everyone wants to get to, where it's the promoters who are offering these opportunities. You don't even have to pitch anymore.
Exactly. I have just a couple of questions, very quick ones. In the first, I think one of the first slides, it was written that podcasts are growing in popularity. Maybe blogs are going down a little bit. Is it still to this day the same? Like, are podcasts still growing? Are we still in the growing phase, and blogs are a bit dying out? So what would you think is, if you had to choose the 80-20, what would you go for? Would you prioritize podcasts or blogs, or a mix of both?
Well, personally, I would always prioritize podcasts, and this is really just harking back to what is the medium that I have experience with. So I love listening to podcasts. I listen to a ton of podcasts. I just don't read blogs. It's just not my thing. And I think for a while I had that feeling like blogs were sort of a thing of the past. Um, they've just been around forever. They probably run their course. But I really think it depends on the audience that you're looking to reach, because things that might have been um, termed blogs in the past, I think, are just evolving into, I don't know, Substack or Medium
Yeah.
or whatever the different platforms are. So I think they're still super relevant. And if you love reading blogs, then you should definitely be pitching yourself to blogs. Um, it's I think, a combination of the audience you want to reach and what you feel comfortable with.
Yeah, and also the classic advice of go where your audience is. I think it applies, because if every one of your readers always hangs out on Facebook, then you should be guest, maybe on a Facebook page, like for a just a short live event or something like that. So
Yeah.
would you say, for somebody just starting out, trying to go to the both ends of the scale, I mean, someone who's had a few books out and they've been guests on podcasts might be, like we said, a little bit easier. But for somebody just starting out, they've just written a book, would you only pitch the small publication, the small podcasts, or just try with the bigger ones as well?
I would probably start out with the smaller ones, just because each one is a learning experience. And I wouldn't want to be in a situation where I was writing my very first blog post for a blog that had, tens of thousands of readers. Um, I would want to buffer myself, always giving your best shot. But if you're just getting into it as a beginner, you're just going to make some mistakes, and you might as well make some mistakes in front of a smaller audience. And then once you feel a little bit more comfortable, um, you know, continuously increase your exposure. This is a little bit counter to advice that I give about, for example, um, submitting your work, your short fiction work, to traditional markets, because my advice there is, if you want to be published in an Ellery Queen Mystery Magazine, then send it into Ellery Queen Mystery Magazine, because you might get it in, and if you don't, then you can go to like your second or third benefit. But a lot of times when you're um, pitching yourself to these promoters, you're doing it for the same topic. So it's not as if you go on a small podcast, you're preventing yourself from going on a larger podcast. In fact, you're probably improving your chances, because you can always share an interview you did, or you could share the blog post you wrote or the review of your book with the person that you're pitching yourself to now. And so I think in that case, it's probably better to build up that level of comfort. And it's not even necessarily tied to the number of books. Like, you could write one book, and a year from now you've done a bunch of blog posts, and so now you're an old hand at it. So you might as well be pitching yourself to larger groups. But yeah, I would say, just to get a sense of comfort with a medium, start smaller.
Yeah, I think it's also ties back to looking at it for the long term, because I remember some of the guests that I reached out to for my first summit, which was 4 or 5 years ago. And back then they were very, very, sort of not unknown, but very small audience and things like that. And I love to see how they've grown. And obviously now we are, friends, online friends, but I have a bit of a more familiarity with them, because I've been in contact with them for 4 years, rather than just somebody pitching them for the first time, essentially.
Yeah.
Yes, it's a great. I think you also need to look at the human aspect of everything, rather than just going with today I have to contact this. Just not just a numbers game.
Yes. Yeah. It's the quality, not the quantity, is what counts when you're pitching.
Exactly. So, Matty, thank you very, very much. It was a great honor to have you again as a guest, and of course, you are always welcome, as you said before. You are in the position where you can always pitch us. Don't worry. And guys, for all the information about Matty and her podcast and her site, you'll find all the links somewhere around this video, usually below. And I will see you in the next session.